pace ourselves as this process goes along, to see how close we can get to being back on time and starting on time and all that stuff. I'm going to hand it to Mike to sort of now take these issues that you have raised and for us to try and evaluate what to do with them. So.
I was hesitant after that round of discussion, which I thought was very good and very helpful. As a matter of fact, I kind of worried about this meeting here more than any of the other workshops because we have new consultant coming in, coming up to speed fast, looking at all this information. We don't have new data. You know, we do have, I shouldn't say that. There's new data out there on the ponds and stuff, but it hasn't been reported, digested, analyzed, summarized, and figured into how it really plays in. So, however, I thought that discussion was very helpful because I think we're starting to get a sense for the complexity of some of these issues when you're talking about Pleasant Bay on one hand, and the degrees of certainty we have on categories of information and uncertainty on other categories. So I think that's helpful. What I'd like to do is push my luck a little bit here and go through the list. Some of them are not actually are non-issues. For instance, identify varying conclusions or conflicting data. That's a recommendation of the stakeholders to the consultant team, and we'll pick that up. Others are the same thing. For instance, saline versus freshwater ponds, designating the difference. We're not going to deal with that. But I would like to go through these one by one, not to generate a lot of discussion and try to focus it, but to deal with two things, our level of certainty on those and the importance. And I have a red and a green marker here. And I'd like to put it on the curve with regard to certainty. Where are we with certainty on these things? And there will be a difference from issue to issue here. And then the red will be how important. I'm going to use red on the ones that we think are very important. And I think when we're done, hopefully, a picture will develop that will be helpful in guiding us forward. So, starting off, update the pond database. Now, stepping back, we have pond data. We have the CWMP assessment. We have a number of people and groups that have been doing continuing assessment of the ponds. They've seen the more recent data. I guess the question is, given what the CWMP said and what previous studies have said and what we would take from the CWMP, are we pretty certain that if we update this, we would get the same results? Or do we think we're going to get a dramatically different picture? Maybe it differs on some ponds and not others. But where are we on the curve here with regard to certainty?
Are you talking about terminal ponds or
Freshwater
freshwater ponds?
Freshwater.
Keep catching me on that. Ponds is not a term. I used the term plant the other day out in the field. And all the biologists looked at me and said, that's not a plant. I'm talking about Tri-Town. Distinguish on plants. So where are we with update pond database? How certain are we on that? Or what degree of confidence did you have that what ponds it tells us are impaired, are actually impaired, and that we need to do something about it?
So again, we're not going to vote, but let's just get a feel of the group here. How many people feel a significant amount of certainty, or a sufficient, let's say, amount of certainty about the trends described about the needs given our existing information about freshwater ponds?
And you can, okay, good.
Okay, sufficient certainty to move forward. Okay, how about insufficient certainty? Okay.
That's good.
I like
So in terms of certainty,
Stop the meeting right there.
Yeah.
yeah.
on that issue. So, I mean, but let's be clear, what that tells us isn't that we don't need to update it, right, or to keep collecting that data. And in fact, that data is gonna be really important to be looked at as we start to think about solutions, so that we have our clearer baselines as to what the impacts of what we might do are gonna be. But if we feel sufficient certainty to move forward, that means we do not necessarily need to put this as a very high priority.
Well, that's a different question.
Immediate.
We're talking just certainty
Okay,
now.
just certainty. Yeah.
Sorry to
Okay.
parse things, but.
All right. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I feel that we know with great certainty on the composite, but I think if we look at the data, it may help us to set priorities, because something that maybe was, for whatever reason, a place that was okay 10 years ago might not be okay today.
That's a good point.
okay.
Now, okay, so I see we're up here on the certainty curve somewhere. Do I use a red or a green? Is this important in terms of planning, or is it our ponds, freshwater ponds, not important? I mean, or,
Oh, no.
red?
If you live on one, it's pretty important.
No.
Scale of 1 to 100, 80% certainty, 90, 100?
78 and a half.
So that's number 2. Okay, important that we have good certainty or confidence in the data.
I think it's important to emphasize here that if we determine that there is a sufficiency in the information presently, that we have a comfortable level of certainty for continuing our planning process, or perhaps beginning some solution considerations, all of this is still reliant on adaptive management, that as new information comes forward, it will be incorporated, and we will have an opportunity to refine our information before any implementation goes on. So I think if we have these conversations, we need to be certain that that is on the front of each of these determinations.
I've thought of that several times. I'm glad that's absolutely true. The needs assessment isn't static. It's not done. There's going to be continuing data come in. We're going to have some of these things we're going to say we've got to go back out and redo an MEP study or whatever. The needs assessment's going to go on, and we are at the planning stage. As we move closer to design, or preliminary design, or even conceptual design of an actual plan, we're going to deal with these in more detail as we go along. Individual ponds. We're going to parse the ponds out and say we're going to deal with this pond differently than that one. And then, even more complex when you deal with an adaptive plan, you have to figure out if the future is different than what you think it was going to be. How flexible is the plan that you did have as a core plan? How flexible is it to deal with that change? Did I say that clearly? Okay. That we have to build flexibility into our solutions going forward, because we are uncertain about those pieces that are in the adaptive part. So, okay. Cedar Pond, Rock Harbor, the nitrogen UAA issue, and other impacts to Rock Harbor Creek watersheds, stormwater, bacteria, other things. 2 different issues. Let's just deal with the Cedar Pond, with the nitrogen issue. Do we have, of course, we're looking at a UAA there, we're looking at dealing with that in a different way, but what the state says, what DEP says, when you talk about, and I know I'm not supposed to speak for other people. Yeah.
DEP, what do you say?
Use attainability analysis.
Whatever Mike said.
Use attainability analysis, which means that there would be a variance or a SA use, which means salinity, saline water highest class, sub boat basin, because there's a human use that's not going to be changed in our lifespan.
Just
Rock
make
Harbor.
sure you clarify.
Rock
We're
Harbor,
now
not
talking
Cedar
about
Pond.
Rock Harbor, not Cedar Pond.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, Rock Harbor Creek, yeah, and the mouth of the creek. Right.
All I would, just to clarify, I mean, that's what a proposal is, or what the discussions have been for a proposal. Right now, there is no such thing as an SA boat basin classification. And the UAA is something that we would have to agree to and then present to EPA. It's a significant hurdle, and to be honest, it's not something that we are inclined to do at this point. But the town certainly is welcome to make its case, and we can evaluate it based on whatever information is provided. But it is a significant hurdle.
A couple of comments first. Just, there is no SA sub-boat basin. However, on the Charles River, there is a B sub CSO, which came about as a similar kind of process, where,
Excursion.
Let's not get into that subject.
but, I mean, there is in the Clean Water Act a process laid out for this, for going forward. Brian's exactly right. There is no SA sub-boat basin. It's a possibility. Also, to get there, you have to prove that you've done everything else conceivable: stormwater management, sanitary surveys, you've maximized nitrogen control, et cetera, et cetera. And unaffordability becomes a factor. Affordability is a key issue. So those are the factors there that come into play. But Sam's good.
And as a follow-up to the DEP representative's comments, I'll just observe that the Water Protection Collaborative and through some of their information, the Orleans Board of Selectmen have discussed this issue, and there appears to be on the horizon the opportunity for some regulatory reform which may obviate the UAA process and provide not necessarily a dissimilar outcome through a different, as yet defined, process. And I certainly would welcome the DEP's comments on the veracity of that.
Set you up.
That's not something that I'm aware of at this point.
And I think that Brian said before, DEP is not EPA. EPA, in doing these kinds of things, has national precedents and different pressures on them from environmental advocates and stuff like that that causes them generally to be less flexible. I couldn't imagine that in Mass DEP's case, but it is. Sandy.
I think that's against the governor's perspective.
But he was smiling.
This is one place where Eastham and Orleans have agreed.
We actually agree with each other.
But let me also caution you that Eastham doesn't know how much it's going to cost. So the disagreement might fall apart, but for now, yes, it's a place where there is agreement.
Just to extend that, if I may, we listened to a very well articulated study on this whole thing, we being a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen in Orleans and the Board of Selectmen in Eastham, clearly indicating that no matter what you do with nitrogen or anything else, it's not going to become a swimmable estuary or body of water. What we do is not going to bring it back to eelgrass or this or that or the benthic organisms. So there was a unanimous decision to move forward to get whatever regulatory approval was necessary to avoid expenditures that were unnecessary to try to achieve goals that were unable to be achieved. And I think it's very important to recognize that that was discussed. It was very well articulated, and it is a unanimous decision on both boards to move forward with it. I would hope that the DEP will listen carefully to what we need to do, because as we move together in partnership, it's important that we're able to justify all the expenses that are necessary to do these projects to our citizens, and that we're going to do something.
I would just urge that as we do move forward, that we look closely at what our goal is, because while I might agree that we're not going to get it to the point of eelgrass or benthic infauna, that is one of the biggest tourist draws in Orleans. It is an extremely important waterway to the entire town. A great number of people spend time there. It is aesthetically beautiful. And this past summer, those who visited will notice the macroalgae, the algae blooms, the scummy mess. And that's not anything that I think any of us are looking for. So while there may be some concern about exactly what criteria are used, I would hope that our solution to any of our waterways wouldn't be to downgrade the criteria in order to meet the criteria. It would be to clean up the waterway as best we can, maintaining the historical and cultural uses of that water body.
Just 2 points on this. First, in about 20 days, we're going to dredge it out, so that's going to be a significant change, which has been agreed to by all the regulatory agencies.
And even Eastham.
And even, and we coughed up half of it.
With funding.
Actually funded it.
Yes.
Equally, John? And second, perhaps more important,
On a per cubic yard,
this is an issue that is not unique to Rock Harbor.
but their share is less.
I've traveled all the shores of Cape Cod, and there are any number of harbors that have been created out of saltwater estuaries and marshes. So, on the one hand, we had discussions about moving ahead as Orleans alone, but I think it is a regional issue. It may take it to another level. So, we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, we've got to move on, but I would say that in terms of certainty here, as Brian's pointing out, there's a high degree of uncertainty. So we're at this range in degree of importance. I think as Judith and others agree, it's important because if you're looking at 36 million, I think was the estimate 6 years ago for sewering that area. That's a substantial investment for something that may or may not be the actual solution for that area. So that's it's a key issue with low certainty. Agreed?
How are you defining the issue again? Would you say it again, please? So before you put that number up there.
This is the disposition and plan, the information we need to go ahead and set a plan for Rock Harbor. And I guess there's different interpretations here. What Dave is saying is boards have decided what we're going to do. So you could say it's a high degree of certainty. What Brian's saying is, yeah, that's great, but there's a low degree of certainty there with regard to going forward. So important. And we have a process for that anyway to go forward on. It's going to be embodied actually in the revised plan here, the revised CWMP. In the adaptive component, we'll have a piece on this right here. And I think we're relatively clear at this point what we need to put in there with regard to dealing with stormwater, nitrogen, and other issues, as well as the regulatory process for proper classification.
Are we still discussing just Rock Harbor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Other impacts are included in that. That's part of what has to be done for any consideration of, now Cedar Pond, let's deal with Cedar Pond, separate from Rock Harbor.
But it does impact Rock Harbor.
It does, they're
Or
linked.
potentially does.
They're linked, yeah. Not only with regard to nitrogen, but other issues too. So let's put them together and keep them in the same dot. I think it's important. I'm not sure, there's a number of issues out there. We're not a high degree of certainty there, and we're not low either. So how about Nauset, Town Cove, ASA report, MEP report on nitrogen sources. This is the issue of the nitrogen sources to Nauset Marsh and Town Cove. And questions have been raised about the background or boundary condition nitrogen that the MEP used in their model as being representative of the ocean. And that it's either changed or it wasn't representative of the ocean. We have a wrong boundary condition, so to speak, for the model. That's the given that they sort of use as the,
There may be also the impact of the spit. The moving spit may affect it as well, so it's a,
So there's a couple of ways we can frame this in terms of our discussion. The maybe least technical and furthest up from the ground I could think of is, given this concern that's been raised here, how much does that influence our certainty of conclusions about Nauset Cove and the need, Nauset and Town Cove, and the need we have there? I mean, that's sort of the top level question. Like, can we, does it raise questions about whether this is red?
It raises questions about what impact we can have by conventional means on improving water quality in Town Cove and not in the Nauset system.
is this something that, by the way, the ones that we come up with here that are, where we have a high degree of importance and uncertainty are going to be moved to some part of an adaptive plan. In other words, we need to do some more work there. We're not just, as I think I said before, we're not just going to put them over there and forget it. Each one of them is going to have a plan for how to resolve it. In other words, here's the steps we think we need to take. That'll be brought back to the stakeholders at some point. Here's the steps we think we need to take to answer this question. And then here's the time frame to do it. And the only point I wanted to make there is this something that a sensitivity analysis using the MEP model could help resolve? In other words, if you use what they used before, it says X% reduction in Town Cove. If you go the max the other degree, what percent does it say? Does it still say some percent reduction is required? So that you know in either case you're going to need, maybe it's not 55, maybe it's 25. If you use the best case or worst case condition. So that's the kind of thing that I think we, Sims and Paul.
Well, we've heard anecdotal evidence this morning that, A, the inlet is much more restricted now than it has been historically, and B, nitrogen levels are up substantially in the last few years. So the boundary condition is not as much my concern. My concern mirrors the issue in Pleasant Bay. What do you do about the dynamic nature of the barrier beach and the tidal exchange? And how do those greater variables impact the decision-making process?
well, the MEP model would also go through a scenario where you had zero septic discharge or septic load. And with the restrictions, what kind of conditions would you get? And it may turn out still to be eutrophic or, problematic. I think from a designer point of view, these are things you want to know before you start planning to do things. What are driving the result of the things you observe? I don't feel confident we know what we ought to do, but that's just me.
Jeff?
Well, based upon the samples that were taken offshore of Nauset Inlet and the samples that were taken in Nauset Inlet and the ASA science comment, you can't control what ASA said is you can't control nitrogen in Town Cove by engineering or regulatory means. So the level of nitrogen, if the level of nitrogen coming into Town Cove, the Nauset system, is at the same level or higher than what is in the system, you're not going to change it by taking nitrogen out in the water body, because there's more ocean water coming in with the same nitrogen that you're trying to reduce.
I think engaged a few years ago with the committee that did the peer review of the MEP report. And since then, I've asked this same question because I think there's some logic to your question. Every time I ask it, they say that the models consider that they say that the background boundary condition of the ocean is input. You have in an estuary like Nauset Marsh a mix of what's coming off the land and through the groundwater along with what's coming in from the ocean. And that ocean concentration and the combination of the two is what they're modeling. So that, and they can vary that ocean concentration. That's what I meant by sensitivity analysis. They can vary that to see how that would have derived the percent nitrogen removal that's required. So they do consider the volume and concentration of nitrogen from the ocean as a boundary condition, and it is what it is, given they test the range that it can. But that's not the answer. That's not my bag. But that can raise another question, going to what Sim's saying about the complexity of this as we go
But
forward.
the complexity inlet, the inlet can be high volume or low volume, but if the water coming in has the same or nearly the same nitrogen as what's in the system, you're replacing the nitrogen you take out. You can't bring the level down.
Yeah. You're raising another question, which is the flux. Yeah, but let's do Ed and then.
I think there's two issues, and we ought to separate them. One is a calculation made by MEP based on a boundary condition, and there's questions about the boundary condition. The questions about the boundary condition can easily be resolved very quickly, very cheaply, by repeating the measurement. Like when you make any other experiment, it doesn't look right. You certainly don't substitute data from another point, like Jeff mentioned, to make the model look good. You repeat the measurement. Okay, that can be done, and that's not a big deal. And that could be part of the adaptive management thing. The second issue is the impairment of Town Cove. There's no question that, in my mind, right now, Town Cove is very impaired. It's terrible. And everybody you talk to who lives around the cove knows that the amount of ulva or the sea lettuce is a magnitude that we've never seen before. So I think there's two issues. One is the present condition, and the other one is a calculation. Because if the calculation is wrong, what it means is the threshold level that you have to achieve is different. And that's what's being questioned by Jeff and ASA Science. They're saying if you look at that, the requirements from the DEP are incorrect because they didn't use the right data in their analysis. And that can easily be fixed, I think.
Alan?
Yeah, this is the one watershed in Orleans where DEP has not given us a final report. I think we need to remember that a draft was done, it was presented to the town, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but presented to the town had a series of questions. Before I got on the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Selectmen hired ASA. ASA did their report, which has been cited here. Then the person who did the work, SMAS, came back and commented on that. And I think at that point, the Board of Selectmen voted to send this material to the regulators for them to make a decision. And to this day, we do not have a final decision. So as we sit around this table and we talk about this, we really don't have a role to play right now because the regulators have not said this is what the number is. There is a draft number, yes, but not a final number. And I recognize all the comments that I've heard. I respect them. I agree with many of them. But sitting around this table with 30 people in the room tells me we're not going to resolve this issue in this forum.
I think, first of all, we do consider the Nauset report final.
Well, I don't think it's been published.
It may not be on the website, but we do consider that final. We did evaluate the ASA report. We found that, we looked at it independently of SMAST, and we found significant shortcomings in their review, and I think that those had been adequately addressed in the responses that had come through. I think, excuse me, I'd have to agree with Sims in regard to really what the more important factor is with uncertainty in that system, and it is the dynamic nature of the system. And again, just as you can adjust or rebuild the model for Pleasant Bay to account for changes that have been made, the same thing can be done for Nauset if there are significant changes in the current configuration over the way it was originally modeled. And that is a valid, absolutely a valid point. With regard to looking at boundary conditions, we still believe that looking at the Atlantic Ocean boundary condition off of Pleasant Bay is a valid one, because ocean conditions going up the coast are not going to be that variable within 5 miles of each other. One of the issues I think that really has kind of gone unsaid with the reason why the boundary condition as originally proposed for the Nauset Inlet was considered to be anomalous was because physical sampling beyond the influence of the inlet itself was extremely difficult, given the volunteers that were going out and taking those samples, and the limitations of the boat that they were using trying to navigate a treacherous inlet. So it probably was not the best location to try, but it was limited by the physical means to get out beyond into open water, which is why the offshore station from Pleasant Bay was utilized, and we believe that was an appropriate background condition, because it's been consistent with all the other Atlantic stations up and down, and there is really no reason to suspect that there would be any difference just in that specific location at Nauset Inlet.
Brian, there were samples taken at the inlet in 2004, which recorded much higher values than were assumed from Chatham. And these were totally discarded. These were valid samples that were discarded. That's what Jeff's talking about.
I know, and I explain why that the location of those samples probably was not the best location.
There were two
that is our explanation.
So I'm a little nervous about us trying to resolve this issue right here and now. I think what we're trying to do at this point is identify issues and to think about what the process is going to be for taking them forward. Where do they fit here? How much energy and time do we need to spend? We're not going to spend it now and resolve it now. We're going to think about and plan for how to take this forward as we go along.
I'm pleased with the clarity of the disagreement. I mean, that's
Diplomat.
Conclude high level of uncertainty.
So we have
No.
a level of uncertainty down in here,
Level
somewhere
of,
in there.
level of
And
certainty is
This is
down
for the,
Is Town Cove impaired? Is
Not-
that the certain?
no,
certain-
it's the understanding of the information that we are using to determine the nitrogen threshold in Town Cove.
I think we have agreement, so far we've heard
I think it's
agreement
certain.
about the impairment of Town Cove.
Yes.
Yes,
That
it's
being
impaired, there's no
certainty,
question about that.
everybody's on board with that.
But the data and analysis
I have,
used to,
it's divided.
but we can take a vote.
Yes, you need to.
Last comment, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting it's not impaired, it is.
I have no
And
question
we need to do something about it, but this
So you're
topic
divided.
has impact on
Well, you should-
what we do and how we do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Follow the group.
there's an inference here that the impairment is due to the ocean. And that's a big inference.
I I disagree.
So,
And just to be clear about when we're trying to do this, we recognize this is not a consensus view, that everybody in the group agrees there's uncertainty, right? We understand that some people might and some people don't, right? So we're not necessarily trying to map that everybody thinks that it's an issue here. We're trying to identify those areas where there are some subset of people as part of this group that think there's an issue.
there's a parallel question that I don't know if we actually have on here, was that even given this uncertainty with regard to the nitrogen concentration in the boundary condition, putting that aside, what kind of certainty do we have on the nitrogen contribution from the land side, and would that in itself cause impairment? If you shut off the ocean, well, of course it would then, because the ocean dilutes it. That's kind of the problem I'm having here, is we're saying that the ocean's the culprit because it has a higher degree of nitrogen or changes nitrogen, when in fact the real question is there something we can do about the land side contribution that would improve profile? I don't know if that's on our list.
Well, there was one other one, and that was the inlet. There was three sources.
Right.
There's the septic source, there's the ocean source, and there's the phenomena of the inlet necking down.
Yeah.
And there is maybe, I know, ESMAST has before recommended that we consider inlet management.
Yes.
Now, whether or not that's feasible or allowable, I don't know. But the other ones who brought it up, they put that as a viable approach.
So I think we need to move on past this one. I think we have an understanding of where we are.
That's certainty, right?
That's uncertain.
Right. And I think that
Low certainty.
Low certainty.
Issues 4 through 7.
And I'd like to say, 4 through 7 kind of are linked. And I'm hoping we can maybe try to move through these more.
Include East Ham pond data and assessment of pond. I think that's something, she wasn't saying evaluate East Ham's ponds and give us a plan. She's saying consider the data that East Ham has in terms of your understanding of what's going on in Orleans. So I think is a given, acceptable. Evaluate East Ham evaluation of INA systems. East Ham's done some evaluation of INA systems, and if we can get that information, that's certainly something we can input. More focus on freshwater ponds.
Can I go back to that for a second?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why East Ham's data would be more important than Brewster's? Okay, you want to add Brewster to both of those?
Because she's still nothing.
Okay, well, you know, what can I say?
Goes on
Stacy?
Orleans, they-
Just while we're there, there are 55 IA systems in the town of Orleans, so we need to look at those as well. So it's all three towns in the watershed.
Well, and what about all the county's information?
Well, Orleans information is the counties now. They're all integrated.
And just to be clear, this is beyond needs assessment, right? This is evaluating, this is information that's going to help us as we evaluate the effectiveness of options and alternatives going forward. So it's slightly off of the thing, but it's good advice to get noted.
More focus on freshwater ponds. Did we deal with that under number 2? Update pond database. I think we had agreement on that.
And the Cape Cod National Seashore data, number 18 on the other board, is that principally pond data? Because this is,
You mentioned the
Someone
seashore.
mentioned that. Sandy.
yeah, is that
It's mostly freshwater sampling.
But they're also doing
Yeah.
some kind of research study on Nauset Marsh, and I would love to know what they're doing.
And they're on
Okay.
Pleasant Bay, too.
Okay.
And Sophia Fox, who's been very involved in that for the seashore, is a member of this panel. She had given us the heads up that she's not frequently going to be able to make it to meetings, but that she, by being a member of the panel, is being held accountable for us going to her and saying, here's what we did, here's how it affects you, here's what we need from you. So she is participating in proxy. And if and when we decide we really need her, we just have to prioritize those times. and we can get her presence here.
There are also Woods Hole studies going on in Town Cove, and I don't know what they're doing either, but I'd love to know. I know they do some stuff on Red Tide, but.
Well, there's also, this Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies has been going, I don't know if you saw it, Carolyn. They're doing something in the town cove too, because their boat's been out there sampling all summer long.
They're doing some benthic mapping for the Cape Cod National Seashore.
Redoing the eelgrass mapping for the whole bay, really.
But I think maybe we can group all these things together that are data about the estuaries, saltwater data and freshwater pond data, and talk about it in that way.
Cape Cod bacteria TMDLs and closures. I wasn't successful Friday in dealing with this issue, for those of you who are there, but I still think it's something we need to deal with. We have a TMDL, we have closures. We have data that is there, information's there that needs to be dug out. Judy's been telling me about previous studies. I don't think we've looked at it. It's sort of been pushed aside by the towns. Maybe that's a continuing preference of the towns because it's not anthropogenic again. Aesthetically, the lower marsh is beautiful, it's useful. It's not a thriving shellfish bed, and I'm not sure if it ever was or would be. It doesn't sound like it was in the past. It's not nitrogen impaired according to MEP. So it's a bacteria issue probably from animals. But is this something that you want to put low data on, but green? We're not. Or this is sort of a, I mean, up in Boston, if you had a TMDL for bacteria on Carson Beach or near Carson Beach, they'd go bonkers. You know, it'd close down everything and people would be, you wouldn't let them in there. Here, it seems to be.
It's just for shellfish.
Mike, I would put a hold on that because when we went to town meeting last May, the Board of Selectmen told town meeting that we'd be coming back in the fall with a whole work program for Namscake Marsh.
Yeah.
And that's part of that
deal with
issue.
that there? Okay. I'll stick that down
So
here.
it may come back later.
Yeah, we can deal with that under Namscake.
Mike, who's here Friday, will take care of that issue.
Current conditions versus CWMP. This is a big one. On the CWMP, Stantec put up the maps, putting aside the nitrogen stuff on those, which the estuaries, but keeping in the saltwater ponds as terminal ponds. Those maps describe sanitary needs, tight tanks, all the stuff that Steve went through. They show different needs around town. They show a concentration of needs downtown. How reliable is that data? How much benefit do you think it would be to update that database? Is it going to give us a different picture?
And again, I'd like, if I could, to sort of ask this in the same way we did about the ponds. We all know there's more information out there and that it was done at a certain year and things have probably changed. But I think the question is, how sufficient is that in reflecting the needs for purposes of planning and moving forward?
Keeping in mind, I think the Sims had said, as we go on in this process, preliminary design, there's going to be a constant update of that, very detailed as they go street by street and actually look at individual buildings, parcels, sanitary systems, et cetera. So that's going to happen whether we say it or not.
If I could just add something, we have been adaptively managing the areas around our ponds. There were land acquisitions that took place around Aries Pond after the MEP report.
Yeah.
It would be easy to go back and double check how much land we took out of development.
Yeah.
Town of Orleans, as part of MEP, did probably the most sophisticated fertilizer management program MEP MEP process. I've looked at, there are 215 houses that have been built since then. We could go back and look and see what changes had taken place in the terminal ponds, and then we could begin an idea. And we've got the water quality samples 6 times a year, so we can begin an idea of what changes have taken place since 2004 or 5.
We can do that. But I'm getting a sense from that we're not, in that map there, we're not going to see a dramatic change. It's going to be tweaking here and there, updating, and looking more on what do we do. So I would say, very important, it's consolidation of all the needs, and again, we're up in the,
Everyone comfortable with that?
what is downtown? A little bit different question, but important. Do we feel if we put 2 people, 3 people in a room and told them don't come out till you got a consensus on what downtown is, they could do it? Is it something we need to spend a lot of time on, or is that going to come as we go into the details and look at whether it should be over here or over there based on actual real conditions rather than theoretically sitting here saying that's downtown?
And we do mean downtown in terms of needs.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Judy?
Maybe not use downtown as the definition, but think of something else to call it based on use or something. Yeah.
Economic center?
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
there you go.
I'm not sure how that changes anything.
I know.
Also, as the financial modeling and the financial considerations will probably have an impact on what system is chosen, so any downtown consideration will be influenced as the model.
That's exactly right.
I think the initial conversation talked a lot about, the downtown in this document versus the downtown in this document versus how it's seen for planning versus how it's seen for economic development versus how it's seen for wastewater. So I think changing the name, while it's purely rearranging deck chairs, as it were, it just makes it clear that we're not talking about the economic development downtown or the planning downtown.
That's a good point. 'Cause
Primary business.
economic center means it's being driven almost exclusively by the economy or commercial, when it's probably more than that. But we can work on that as we go along.
Aren't we talking about removing the most nitrogen for the best buck? I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's not just downtown, it's behind it. You've got the condos back there that generate a lot.
Yeah.
And so I like the red blotch thing. Let's go for the best buy for the buck. Okay. The best buy for the buck, not downtown, the best buy for the buck.
I suggest red blotch may not be a good choice.
That's not a good thing to call it.
A brown one would be probably more.
I think the whatever we call it, I think the idea here is there's enough sense that we're going to be able to have that conversation. We have enough information and enough shared understanding that when it comes to planning, we'll be able to
See, that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that the people outside this room are going to take a look at it and say, well, let the downtown business people pay for it.
Call it high density.
And it's taking in a whole lot of homes.
That's a different question.
So we'll take that.
Yeah, I just think that needs to be taken into
Yeah, there's
consideration.
ripples from it that we need to deal with, but.
That's where we need to do some education.
We need to.
Yeah, okay. What is water quality?
Depends on the use.
Pardon my analogy, is it, no, I won't use it. It's regulatorily, it's water quality standards.
Is this not driven by a regulatory process?
Yeah, other perceptions of it. I mean, regulatory includes narrative criteria as well as quantitative criteria, so it includes things like clarity, odor, taste,
Potential
yada, yada,
uses.
yada. So I think if we stick with that, we're okay.
Well, that's
Are there other issues on water
uses.
quality that we're missing?
Uses.
Huh?
Use.
That's part of that
Yeah.
same standard, because each designated use has criteria, and
Right.
those criteria drive the use, so. So, on 14, I would say it's
That might even be the highest certainty we have.
highest certainty.
Yep, continue my little graph here.
And I think, okay, incorporating master plans. Huh?
Does that link with 13? 15?
Yeah, that's more of a data analysis, right? Okay,
We did 16.
Saline versus, we did that. Amscape Marsh and Pleasant Bay data since 205, I think we dealt with that. Pleasant Bay nitrogen trends before MEP impacts, what was the historic conditions in Pleasant Bay? Is that, seems like there's, the further back you go, more lack of certainty, but Carol?
Well, I would say we have a high degree of certainty of what the conditions are that need to be addressed. And we continue to gather data, and we can continue to look at that data in, reasonable intervals. But that today we have data that gives us a high degree of confidence for planning purposes in Pleasant Bay.
Okay. Especially the terminal ponds. Would you have the same degree of certainty with the open bay as you do the terminal ponds, would you?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Agreement? So we have going once, 19, high degree of certainty, going twice. And it's important. Okay? Not that there's not going to be continuing assessment of the eelgrass, of the water quality, hydrodynamics, et cetera, but, okay, good. Now, I think we just said for Pleasant Bay, we're maybe okay here, but for Nauset Marsh, it seems like we have a different condition. We've already put Nauset Marsh up there. Didn't we look at that?
4 through 7.
4, yeah. So we have 4 through 7 down there already. We have Pleasant Bay done already, so we've done that. Additional contaminants of concern.
Well, we don't know what they are yet, or how to deal with
So
them.
that's pretty uncertain.
Kind of down there at the bottom.
So uncertainty, okay. Red or green?
Well, I mean, one of
Red
the,
is important. Red is important.
I would
Green
say
is
red.
we don't know
Important.
much about it, but it's, who
Red.
cares?
Red.
red, red and low certainty.
I'm not sure what we're referring to there. To the extent that we're talking about what are generally described as emerging contaminants of things such as pharmaceuticals, pesticides, those kinds of things, that's a well-defined problem. It's the numbers are very, very different. Potential costs are very different. I think the decision we need to make is as we move forward towards solutions, do we need to define solutions that will take care of, say, filter pesticides or pharmaceuticals out of any water treatment we do? But is that what we're referring to here as other concerns?
Yes.
I think we are. I think that the issue is that the cost of doing that goes up somewhat exponentially.
Yeah, through the roof.
So the uncertainty plays a big part when the cost is high. If the costs were low, who cares whether you're uncertain or not? You do it. But the cost being so high, it magnifies them.
I've spent more time on this particular issue, and as much as it's dear to my heart, I don't think it's something that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I just think is well below the noise level compared to everything else we're dealing with. And I may be irresponsible in saying that.
No, I would agree with you, but what we are beginning to see now with work by the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, as you know, it's showing up. So it's something we need to have on our radar screen, but we're probably not going to spend a lot of time
George
working on it.
Hoyfelder has a analysis of it too on, that you can get, looking online in the county, that is very helpful. And he doesn't give answers, but he does lay out what it is, what the parameters are, et cetera, et cetera. And Brian, do say.
The only thing I'd say in terms of expense about treating these things, it's not so much that you're looking at the expense of treating them now. It's looking at the flexibility to be able to accommodate future treatment in whatever treatment scheme that you choose. So it's not the case that you have to go out and spend the extra money in anticipation that you might have to deal with this. It's that, is it more amenable to upgrades and modifications to adequately address them once those standards are set?
One last uncertainty, which I don't think anybody mentioned, is that we don't have any standards for measuring them. We don't know what's harmful and what isn't.
Okay, so we're going to synthesize this in the notes and try and figure out how it all is going to fit into the adaptive management process as we go forward. We're a little off our agenda. I think we're gonna hold off on identifying priority locations for now. Just don't, we can think about if there's a way to do that in between meetings. I want Mike to just say a few words about the process for developing alternatives, but I'm gonna have him do that within the context of the overview for the next meeting. You did that? Or just, did people understand that Stantec is gonna work with?
Oh, that process.
That process.
Oh, okay, yeah. Real quickly, Patty and Paul have been very, very helpful and in providing the background for the 208 work that's been done, and have actually, as I said before you got here, done a lot of additional work, technical work on tools that allow it to be much more useful in this setting, which we're going to talk about on the 24th. And I've been talking to Patty, and I'm preparing an MOU we'll talk to the board about tonight. We haven't prepared it yet, but some of the points that would be in an MOU between the commission and the town and the towns with regard to working together going forward, because some of the tools that, one particular tool, several of them, that the commission's developed would be very, very useful in taking our plan and ground truthing it into the compliance framework, especially for nitrogen. So we're working to, they're actually working with Stantec starting tomorrow to hand over those tools, train Stantec people on how to use them. They're not going to define our alternatives or what we do, but they give us a starting point that puts us way ahead. Instead of going back and developing theoretical technologies and options, we're able to start out and right away start ground truthing options, the bookends to Orleans. And we're going to work closely with the commission in doing that so that they understand what we're doing, we understand what they did, and I think the benefits will show up about 9 months from now, if not sooner.
So in 2 weeks, we will have these starting point alternatives to look at, and those are being derived by Stantec using baseline tools and starting points from the 208. So that's really the key point we wanted to make for that.
We're already starting to look at, say, for instance, they might have had a PRB along a particular street. We're saying, no, that's not going to work here. We should, if we're going to look at PRBs, we need to look at it along this street, or aquaculture here and not there. or they didn't deal with the wastewater plant really at all in terms of any details. We have that kind of detail, so we'll put that into the plan. So it's customizing it to Orleans.
Will any of that include projects that involve other towns?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the scenarios we're gonna be looking at are gonna be watershed scenarios. They are not gonna end at the town line. Yes.
I don't have my meeting schedule here. The Cape Cod Commission's Lower Cape watershed meeting is on that afternoon.
Yes.
Is
It's
ours
gonna be a big day.
Is ours a morning meeting?
Ours is a morning meeting.
Okay, thanks.
So it's a long day.
Double trouble.
Long day. We'll caravan.
Very well.
Like today. Like today.
Okay, so communication protocols, hopefully you guys got a chance to look over what I suggested. It was primarily trying to clarify some of the communication between meeting questions, clarifying that we are asking the participating members of the public to also abide by the ground rules when they make public comments. This meeting, we've been a little bit more flexible in just taking comments from everyone. I am curious from the panel if you're comfortable with that. I felt like it was helpful, so if that's okay with all of you, what I would say is we can do that as long as it works, and if and when it stops working, we'll stop doing it.
Right.
So if you have concerns about that approach, do let me know and we can revisit it. And then you'll see I sort of added an F on page 8 that really is about, both about open meeting law, consistency, but I think part of this is also about trying to keep consistency with the ground rules. That is, people ask questions about what about emails or comments that are outside of, not coming from members of the panel. And so the request in this is that the panel is going to disregard comments that are inflammatory, that are attacking, that are disrespectful, that are basically beyond the pale of the ground rules that you all have agreed to operate by. You can't stop any members of the public from contributing such emails to you, but you're gonna give it the attention it deserves based on how productive and constructive it is. So that's that addition to the ground rules, and I just want to make sure people are comfortable with that, you agree with that, if you have any comments about it. Okay. All in the service of very transparent, very open, lots of information, and safe space, productive space, constructive space. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, so enough said about that. I will finalize those and we'll update the revised versions on the website. Any other comments or needs about next meeting, knowing what you've heard? Yes.
Thanks, Stacy. Kind of related, I think, to what Gordon said right at the outset. Could we put a little bit of time on the next meeting just to begin to formulate an outreach plan? You know, it's great when Mike goes to the selectmen. I'm sure at least 2% of the town watches the television program. But we really need to honor and respect all the work that was done. I mean, just in, July, August, we are in September, 3 months. Bring on Stantec, the dialogue that's done. I really sit here and see that it's been remarkable and needs to be promoted. So.
Great. So if members of the panel are amenable to that, here's my proposal off the fly is I'm going to request that you guys send me any ideas you have about what to put in that plan, just direct to me, again, not copying anybody else. And I'm going to compile that and do some of my own thinking as well and ask others and come to you at the next meeting with some ideas about how we might take that topic on. Anything else? Yeah.
One question. The Stantec report includes a one-page summary of each of a lot of the documents, which some of us haven't read many of those documents. It appears very, very useful. Do you need and I think you're newer to this, do we need to go through some process where people look through this and validate and sort of, because if I'm going to, can I trust that these conclusions, I can move forward on these conclusions, or do you need some feedback loop so that we're confident in it?
Yeah, so I would say it this way. We definitely want to hear any concern, we want you to read them. We want to hear any concerns that you have as you read them, or questions, or more information, or anything else that comes up for you. We are not going to assume that you all have agreed to every single thing in here. What we want is your help to refine it, to make it as good as possible. Does that sound?
Yes, please. Tracy?
Yeah.
Paul made the suggestion that, and the issue that the data upon which MEP is based, there's a lot more information available, and we have it, and we've analyzed it, our group has, and we would like to share that with the contractor. I think that would be a good action item and anybody else who wants to share data, get it in their hands, because that's been a big issue here, is the fact that all the data upon which we've based everything is 10 years old and it's all changed.
Just a quick comment on that, and certainly I picture this program, this process, one of the goals of it is to create a database of the most recent, the best data we have, and certainly that will be helpful. However, Stantec is very limited in what they can do with the MEP model and redoing analysis based on that, et cetera. And that's one of the issues as we go forward. How do we update stuff, and even monitoring going long-term wise? But so some of the data will be very useful and fit in right away. Others we'll look at, but probably won't have ability to use.
Well, I was looking at it just as a means of filling the void of the data that isn't on their list. I agree that, they're not a university with a lot of scientists and boats and everything to do hydrological studies, but at least they can be made aware of the data that we do have.
And that's great. We can have it. I think the analysis and conclusions from it, though, is we can't deal with.
Right.
Mike, if I could comment, part of our task is to develop a monitoring plan for the adaptive management plan.
Right.
So clearly, any updated information is going to supplement that monitoring plan, and the monitoring plan will provide information on how and when and where more data is gathered. So that I think that information basically again kind of moves us down the field a little bit when we start talking about a monitoring plan.
Carol
Okay.
has a question.
Yeah.
I was going to say that all of that data is on the town, available through the planning office of the town, so any data that they need can be supplied that way.
So, last lease schedule, so we had sent all that out to you. I did not include it in this packet, but hopefully you all got it and saw it, and it's on the website. This is our draft schedule. We know things may come up, and some of those, as Mike noted, some of the meetings are tentative. If we need them, we wanted to just save the room. We wanted to save the dates on your calendars. If people have issues with those, we really tried to avoid things that were standing meetings, so there's a little bit of flux between morning and afternoons. But in general, that's going to be our guiding set of dates going forward for now. Are there questions or concerns? Okay. And it's great if people let me know if they can't be here for a meeting, or if they're going to be late or whatever. Those are all helpful pieces of information, and it might also help us configure the room appropriately. Okay, so public comment. I know we did give space for comments from those not at the table during the meeting as well, but if there's any additional comments people want to make, if you just could say your name.
Courtney Gavin, I just wanted to remind folks, recall their attention more or less as to why we're here. Review history a little bit, why the town sewer concepts didn't really get the consensus a lot of folks were hoping for, and why adaptive management is the focus now. Groundwater quality in Orleans is among the highest on Cape Cod. Data published in 2012 showed nitrate levels averaging around 0.25 parts per million in this town that has never seen central sewer. By contrast, Falmouth and Chatham, which have had sewers for roughly a quarter of a century or more, average nearly twice that amount of nitrate in their public drinking water wells at 0.43 and 0.58 parts per million respectively. And according to its annual report, drinking water wells in the town of Barnstable, an area also served by town sewer for many years, showed as much as 5.4 parts per million nitrate in 2012, about 20 times that of Orleans. The challenge for preserving groundwater quality has and will always depend most importantly on the intensity of aquifer use, not the technology that can be thrown at the issue. It boils down to a simple percentage: the annual number of gallons contaminated and discharged back to the aquifer by human activity versus the number of gallons of relatively clean water flushed through the aquifer system annually by rainfall. Everything else is simply window dressing, or worse yet, propaganda and spin. Therefore, a water quality expert would have to wonder, why is Orleans not focusing its efforts primarily on water use reduction strategies first and foremost? And why isn't the state doing more than lip service to amend its plumbing code and fund development of pilot projects to separate wastewater streams for vastly improved recycling and quality improvement efforts? We know that the bulk of compounds that are harmful to our groundwater are contained in toilet and kitchen sink wastes. The large flows associated with laundry and shower wastes serve to inhibit adequate processing of the more harmful streams that require longer residence time and more careful processing in the wastewater treatment system that's being used. Unless and until the state and local authorities address these critical issues of conservation, waste separation, and reuse, water quality initiatives such as this cannot be taken very seriously.
Any other comments from the? Okay, any other comments from the panel?
Good meetings.
Seeing none, then I guess a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.